Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Grog by R.W. Krpoun, narrated by A.T. Chandler. Chapter 1. Burke was going on about freedom. Again. Me, I've never been free, but I think if I was to be made free, the first thing I would do would be to pick up that brick over there and use it to smash in Burke's skull. Not that I hate Burke. I don't really hate anyone. But his talk gets on my nerves. It isn't proper talk, Burke's chatter, but an endless drone on uninteresting things, punctuated by sudden questions, so that if you manage to ignore him, you are suddenly made to look stupid. I am stupid, as Master Horne assures me on a regular basis, but I do not like to be made to feel stupid by other slaves. That is not proper. It was mid-morning on a miserable spring day whose low-hanging clouds looked pregnant with rain, and the air still had some winter's teeth in it. Everything was muddy and clammy, and I was inclined to bash in Burke's head just for those reasons. Unaware how thin a thread his life was hanging by, Burke rattled on as if he had to get everything in his head spoken aloud before noon. We were leaning against a hitching rail at the east gate, waiting without much hope for an escort job. Or rather, I was sort of leaning, sort of perched on the rail, with my ankles crossed and my thumbs hooked into my belt, and Burke was standing tall, feet spread, fists on hips, as if posing for a statue of a noble slave prepared to seize freedom by the scrotum. Not that Burke was tall. I topped him by a good measure. More still if I applied the brick with force and skill, both of which I possess in abundance. I was slouching because I was a slave waiting for work. Burke was standing because he had standards. Standards are like whore's pox, I believe. As soon as you got it, you had an urge to give it to somebody else. I really wished he would shut up. Our position at the hitching rail put us within easy earshot of the windows of one of the classrooms of the Tepton Academy for Boys, and I liked to listen to them recite their lessons. Both Burke and I spoke far better than most slaves, as good or better than most free men, because Master Horne had hired an old tutor to instruct our age block in the proper manner of speaking in good company, including good manners. Listening to the classes reciting kept my lessons fresh, and reminded me of our whole age block chanting proper words and sentence structure as we ran and drilled. Our better quality speech helped with escort jobs, and on more than one occasion it had made competitors think us weak. Master Horne always said no advantage was too small to pass up, that you can win a match on small things. Now, even in my head I talked the way Elder Fassi taught us. There was a question. What? I said, why should we continue to obey? We are a noble mixture of human and Ukar blood, resulting in warriors that are bigger, stronger, faster, and tougher. We are highly trained pit fighters with many kills to our credit. This city should recognize us as leaders. We are bigger and all that. We are also slaves. But why do we not cast down our shackles and rebel? Because first, we are not wearing shackles. Second, we are outnumbered by many, many to one. And third, because Master Horne would go spare. Burke held his head as if it pained him. Then why do we not simply walk out this gate and be free? Because the guards, well, they should be watching. In any case, we walk out the gates, and then what? I've never been outside the city, not really. Who feeds you? Feed yourself. Brick, skull, skull, brick. It was a happy thought. He waited, but I wasn't going to answer a stupid question. It wasn't like we hadn't had this exchange many, many times. Many, many, many times. The Tipton Academy for Boys held its classes on sums and counting elsewhere in the building, so for me, the numbers beyond my fingers remain an unexplored realm. Some travelers were coming in, and I straightened up and tried to look alert and trustworthy, because a job would get me away from Burke, or at least he would shut up if they hired both of us. Despite his standards, I was first choice by dint of being taller, broader, and less Ukar-looking. They were a mixed bunch, travel-worn and badly battered, which boded well for our prospects. There was a man in the lead, a warrior, limping and looking sick or wounded. A female Nisker led 2 pack mules in train, and a female Delian, in a dazzling white fur cloak, was sitting sideways on the lead mule's pack saddle, apparently trying to avoid the dung, mud, and puddles that dominated the gate area. She flipped back her hood, revealing a very pretty, fine-boned face and thick silver hair worn in a combed-back crest atop her head and shaved to a close burr on the sides. A diamond sparkled in the stud of her left nostril, and blue fire flashed from the gems mounted in silver that hung from her long, pointed ears. Figuring she was in charge, I stepped up, hands clasped across my belly so as to look respectful. "Need an escort, my lady. The streets are not always safe." The mule and the gear on the pack saddle lifted her to eye level with me, although she gave the distinct impression she was looking down at me. Her eyes were golden, the part that is normally colored anyhow, but they were colder than steel in winter. She looked me up and down, granted Burke a glance, then looked at me again. The mule had stopped when I had spoken. "I don't doubt the streets are not safe, but can you change that?" Her voice was nice. I was surprised. "Gladiator, my lady. 60 death matches, give or take." Master Horne told me to say 60. I can't count much, but it was a lot of matches, that was certain. "Many more to first blood. We do a proper job of escorting, and have never lost a hire. We are of Master Horne's Ebon Blade barracks." She gave me the up and down again. Maybe she didn't like my kind. That wasn't unusual. I had never spoken to a Delian before, because there weren't many in the city, and none were slaves. I knew they had a province mostly to themselves somewhere, were a little physically different from men, and that men liked them. They liked men, too. "Very well. What is the rate?" I held up the glass. 1 shilling each time the sand runs out. 1 shilling if we draw blood. 1 shilling noon meal. 2 shillings evening meal. 1 shilling night watch. Each. "Both of you, then. The shorter leads the mules." Burke took the lead rope without comment, but I could see his hide was burning. I flipped the lever to start the sand and then pulled on my fighting gloves. As a slave, I wasn't supposed to display a weapon unless working. "Hey, biggin, hold on!" The Nisker nimbly hopped onto the hitching rail and scraped her boots clean with the brick I had planned for Burke. Her hood fell back, revealing a bright, merry face under an unruly mop of red hair held back by a folded scarf of green and brown. "Give us a lift, then." Niskers were just like men, only short, less than 4 feet tall. It took a moment to figure what she meant. Then I carefully grasped her around the waist and set her on my shoulders astraddle my neck. "If I have to fight, you'll fall." "I'll be off, and I'll land well." She drummed her palms on the top of my bare skull as I caught up with the lead mule. "I'm Hatcher. Who are you?" "Grog." "Grog's a drink. Rum and water. Who named you that?" "I don't know." Burke was finally quiet, and now I had another voice. I kept my eyes moving, but it wasn't a nice day, and there were fewer people about the streets than usual. "Why don't you know? That one I knew. I was a baby when I came to the slave barracks. They named me.
Good thing they didn't name you Really Bad Ale instead, I suppose.
She drummed some more.
You don't speak like a slave.
I explained about the tutor.
So you fight in the pits?
Yes.
And do escorts?
The pits are only open a few days each month, and I only get a few fights because I am of the high rate. So I practice, train lesser-ranked pit fighters, and earn extra money for my master by escorting people safely through the city.
How much does a high rate win?
The purse on my last fight was 100 marks, but the betting went many, many times higher. She whistled.
How much did you get?
I got a very good supper.
Ah.
The battered warrior led us to the Golden Cockerel. As we walked, Hatcher asked many questions about the city, most of which I did not know. The inn's courtyard was cobbles that were freshly swept, so the Delian hopped down from the mule to stand on her own feet.
We shall see to our rooms, and then I wish to undertake an errand or two. You, Grog, shall escort me. The other can go.
She flipped a shilling to Burke.
Hatcher, see to the mules.
She flipped me 2 shillings.
For the time. Wait here.
I found a patch of wall in the sun and leaned on it. Burke kicked at a cobble and then left, improving my day. After a while, a servant came out with her nose in the air and gave me a tankard of good ale and 3 large sausage rolls wrapped in a clean rag. A while later, she came out to collect the rag and the tankard, and to give me a sneer. The bulb emptied. I turned it over and moved a bead on the base to the other side of the wire. Without Burke to ramble on, waiting was not unpleasant. You learn about waiting in a slave barracks, or at least you learn, or you get sold off to some place where you worked very hard. I could outwait a brick, if Burke wasn't talking. I don't mind talk, proper talk, to pass the time. Proper talk is telling about matches, or about food, or girls, or about who hates who in the barracks and why. Not freedom this and freedom that, and the injustice of slavery and standards and the superiority of the Ukar blood. I have been a slave all my life, and while I may be stupid, I don't need Burke to tell me about being a slave. And while he rants about injustice a great deal, I am not clear on what injustice actually is. As to Ukar blood, I've shed a lot of it, both mine and others, and it flows as quickly as anyone else's. In my opinion, that's about all you can say on that subject. Hatcher and the Delian came out the side door donning their cloaks when the bulb was almost empty. The Delian flipped me 2 more shillings.
Noon meal and time. Now, the Temple District.
The staff had a sedan chair and 2 slave men waiting out front for the Delian, while Hatcher rode on my shoulders. Other than worrying about her falling off if I had to fight, it wasn't a problem. Niskers are men, just from a different part of the land. They looked like all the other men except they were short. Hatcher was not quite 4 feet tall and mostly slender, except in the bust. Master Horne said I was just 3 fingers shy of 7 feet, and very broad, even for a half-human, half-Ukar, so she wasn't any sort of burden. I had seen men carrying children the way she was riding me. The sedan chair slaves and I waited while the Delian, whom Hatcher said was Proveen Seel, Proveen being a title, and Hatcher went inside a temple. The sedan men wanted to dice, but I had no money, so they diced against each other. I used the time to ponder the noon meal shilling. It was against the rules not to eat on a job, because hunger was bad for training. But I had eaten. Tips were to be turned in with other funds, but this was not a tip. Would it be proper to keep the shilling for myself? What would I do with it? Other slaves had money, but I never had encountered an opportunity to get money. Was this an opportunity? It was a matter to study carefully. After the temple, we went to 3 big houses, each in turn, and I waited with the sedan men at all 3, twice in courtyards, once in the street. In the second house, in the courtyard, a fat serving woman brought us mugs of ale and talked with the sedan men. She ignored me, which was fine, because I was still busy pondering the shilling issue.
Now we need to go to the desert abyss, Provine Sael announced after she emerged from the third house. We had waited in the street, and the visit had been short. She looked peeved, in a genteel sort of way.
That is in the barracks, I gestured towards the west. A very bad part of town. The abyss is safe, the owner brooks no trouble, but the barracks are dangerous.
Which is why I hired you.
She climbed into the sedan chair and rapped on the roof. The carriers eased it up and set off.
Bad neighborhood, eh?
Hatcher drummed on my head. This was a nice part of the city with cobbled streets kept clean, so I guess she just didn't want to walk.
You've got a neck like a tree stump, you know that?
There was no answer for that, so I kept silent. The sedan chair slaves grounded their chair at the entrance to the barracks and explained they weren't allowed to enter. Provine Sael climbed out and paid them, and tossed me another shilling.
Do you know the way to the desert abyss?
Yes, my lady, but the barracks are not a good place.
Which is why I hired you, she finished for me.
Call me Provine,
not my lady.
She shrugged the fur cloak back and settled the lay of a sheathed short sword with a hilt that had blue gems set into its silver inlaid pommel.
Hatcher, you need to walk.
Hatcher flipped off my shoulders and landed like a cat. She had 2 of the heavy fighting knives her people carried, each blade angled forward a bit for chopping. Good weapons, but she was still little more than half my height. Provine Sael was almost as tall as a female man, but slight of build and too elegant to be taken seriously. This could not possibly end well. The barracks were a very old part of the city, old and forgotten in many ways. The buildings sagged and leaned, and the streets were narrow, twisting, and nothing but mud. There were many gaps between buildings, as no one built anything in the barracks when buildings burned or were torn down. If you wanted to buy or sell things that were not legal or were unpleasant or enjoyed a rougher sort of entertainment, you visited the barracks. If you were dirt poor and desperate, you lived there. It was also home to the slave market, which I dislike. Being a member of the Ebon Blades, a proper barracks of the old school, was a good thing, even as a slave. But I do not like the barracks. There were eyes on us from the very first step, and I kept mine moving, too. I expected Provine Sael to mince about worrying about her fancy boots, but she slogged along at a brisk rate. I had my cudgel in hand, twirling it occasionally as if a yard of black oak with iron bands was a stalk of grass. It and the others' blades kept a lot of people we passed honest. The mud actually helped. No one was going to try to snatch an earring or that white cloak and try to flee in this footing, which was good because I'm not built or trained to run fast. It was still daylight, which helped, as the barracks were more a nighttime place, but there were still people moving around doing whatever free people had to do. Many down here knew of me, knew what I was capable of, and that would help too. To others, I was just a halfer, a tusker, half human, half Ukar brute, but that counted for something too. I am big, not just tall, but broad, with more bone and muscle than a man of the same height. I am as big as a pure Ukar, without the tusks. I have none at all, which is unusual, or the out-thrust under jaw. My skin is not as coarse and pebbly as an Ukar's, although tougher than a man's and sort of olive gray. I have no hair, but my ears lay flat against my head, unlike Burke, whose ears stand at pure Ukar right angles.
and while they are a bit pointed, they aren't spiky like Ukar's. My face is like a man's, in the way a statue hacked out of rock looks like a man, blunt, simple, and not showing much of what goes on behind my eyes. Being stupid, as Master Horne points out regularly, there isn't much actually going on behind my eyes. But people can't tell that just by looking, I think. As I suspected, trouble found us, or rather, was waiting. But it wasn't what I had expected. We had cut across a couple empty lots where the ground was less muddy, and were just a short way from the abyss when a half-dozen men moved from across the street to confront us. 5 were Brock's toughs, mean-looking bastards in worn clothing, while the 6th was a nondescript fellow in good clothing with a dark scarf covering the lower half of his face. He hung back slightly as the bravos moved forward. I stepped out in front of my charges, venturing a quick look to the flanks and rear to see if there were surprises afoot, but there weren't. "All right, Tusker. Time to go about your business," a dark-skinned bravo with a puckered scar across his forehead announced. "On my business." I stretched my arms to my sides first, then overhead, up on my toes, both to loosen up and to emphasize my build and height. Master Horne says, you can win on small things, and instilling a bit of fear was one such edge. "Escort job, right?" He grinned, showing missing teeth. "A slave about his master's business?" He held up a 6-shilling piece. "Here's for your time. Tell your master he made a wise investment." It works that way sometimes, because an owner would not be happy if his slave got cut up in a street brawl. Behind me I heard blades leaving their scabbards. I shrugged. Sorry. I really was. The odds were not in my favor, but I wasn't going to go back to Master Horne and tell him I had given up an escort without a fight. He ran a proper barracks of the old school, and losing customers was not how our reputation had been built or could be maintained. When you engage the ebon blade, you get quality work. That is the rule. He flipped the coin to me, but I let it bounce off my chest. He frowned and did a double take. Coin, slave, slave, coin. You confused brute? No, I was not confused, but I certainly wished I had a blade and maybe a shield, or Burke. There was a decent chance I could die here. Pick up the coin and leg it, Tusker. This isn't your fight. I shrugged again. I got no fights. I am a slave. I twirled the stick. What I have is commands. Command says guard. I guard. Inspiration hit me. Maybe you aren't paid enough. I got 60 death matches behind me. I seen him, a scrawny type on the left end of the line spoke up. Pit fighter he is. He's not lying. Double. The better-dressed man in the back didn't speak loudly, but everyone heard him. Defend us, Krpoun said quietly. As a slave, I could not start a fight. I am big, but I am quick for my size, and my reach is a couple inches longer than a man of equal height. Back in my youth, I fought as a pugilist before I got my last growth, and that gave me an appreciation for reach and footwork that many fighters don't have, especially toughs who lack formal training. Too many see a stick as just something you swing, but I'm not one of them. A full extension lunge put the iron cap atop my cudgel into the leader's solar plexus with enough force to knock him back a step, curling into a fetal position as he fell and the air whooshed out of him. A lot of fighters train to attack, think, attack, think. Master Horne always taught me that a fight is one single action drawn out until only you were still standing. Never quit, never pause, just fight. A warrior flows like a stream, always has. I am stupid, but I can learn if you give me time. Even as the shock of my cudgel hitting the leader registered, I was moving forward and to my left, catching the top of the club with my left hand and giving the next thug a two-armed strike horizontally across the forehead as he was drawing his dirk, a sort of pushing blow because I needed him to fall back. 2 on 1 are fatal odds if they both act. The way you deal with a group is to work it so you take them one at a time. I wasn't optimistic with this bunch, though. I figured they knew the same thing. There was a soundless flash behind me, like a fireworks, except at shoulder height. But it wasn't my concern because the third and last to my left thug had his blade out and was swinging. I parried with the cudgel in my left hand and lost it in the process, but it got me inside his reach where I drove the back of my right fist up into his jaw, snapping his head back and sweeping him off his feet in a spray of blood and tooth fragments. My fighting gloves were heavy leather with half of each finger length removed, so I had contact with my weapons. Iron studs, a half-inch across, dotted the backs to give a slapping or swinging blow more force. Spinning, I ducked under a wild swing from a bravo who was pawing at his eyes and slammed 2 good jabs into his belly, finishing with a backhand blow to the temple as he doubled over, dropping him neatly into the mud. The 5th was down, screaming and clutching a hamstrung leg until Hatcher darted in and nearly severed his head with a brutal chop. The leader was still down and trying to get air into his lungs. The 2nd thug was out cold, or dead. The 3rd was crawling away. The 4th was lying on his back and smearing mud around his face with both hands, and the 5th was dead. The well-dressed man was nowhere in sight. I recovered my cudgel and the 6-shilling piece, and awaited orders. Hatcher was wiping her blades clean on the dead man's shirt and sheathing them. Provinciale was standing where I had last seen her, thoughtfully rubbing one of the tiny horn nubs on her forehead. Seeing me looking at her, she dropped her hand and started walking. "We must be going. Hatcher, leave him be. Grog, well done." That startled me. Well done. I felt hot and nervous, like my skin just shrank. Who thanks a slave? I wasn't sure it was proper. Hatcher hurried to catch up, tossing the dead man's purse aside. "They didn't get paid in advance, that's for sure. You move fast for a biggin. 60 death matches, eh?" "Probably." "You don't know?" "I don't count much. I know up to 10, I offered, feeling stupid. 60 is a number this many tens. Hatcher held up 6 fingers. Huh. I thought about that. Yeah, that's about right. Maybe a few more. The little Nisker shook her head. And he seemed like such a nice fellow. Who? She grinned at me. It threatened her ears. Never mind. I'm glad we met you, Grog. Twice. That was something to remember. This was the best day ever. Master Horne had taken me to the Abyss several times in the past, as a bodyguard. I killed a brute there, not a real paid fight, but rather a meeting that went wrong. He had been nearly as big as I was, but slower, not as well trained. The owner of the Abyss had been angry, but the other parties at the table had started the trouble, and so they had to pay money to make things right. Outside it looked like a worn-out warehouse, but inside it was fairly nice as taverns go. Once Master Horne had commented that 1/10 of the city's money flowed through the place, although I never saw anything special in it, except that there weren't many drunks, and a lot more serious talking than in most places, and always several bodyguards standing and watching. The outside bouncer opened the door for Provinciale, and she glided past as if he was invisible. I knew him, a man who had fought in the pits. He had been late in his career when I entered, so we never faced each other. He wasn't wearing a collar now, I noticed as we exchanged nods. So he had won,
or purchased his free.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?